Thank you for joining. I'm Matthew Stibber. I'm founder and CEO at Articulate Marketing, and I'm going to be talking about ways to make your webinar program work harder to achieve the goals you've set for it. It's been an interesting and exciting and long day here at Articulate Mansions, Articulate Chaos Cottage. We have builders and things like that, and so I also talked too much on this morning's episode, so I'm going to try and be a bit more concise. No agenda slide, just get straight into it. I've done 100 webinars or more for Articulate. I've launched 5 client podcasts. I've been doing this marketing stuff for 25 years, and that's where I'm coming from. I'm going to start with something that might sound a little bit controversial. Webinars as a format came out of, blossomed in 2020 because of that whole COVID work from home thing. All those conferences were cancelled, events were cancelled. We had to do something for marketing. That's when we launched our webinars. And at the time, Articulate, I was guilty, I think along with a lot of other people, of measuring the success of a webinar campaign from the perspective of top of funnel lead generation. If you filled in the form to come to the webinar, that's the mission accomplished, right? What you get when you attend, what you learn, that's sort of secondary, important, yes, maybe, but the key fulcrum was the sign-up form. And it's still important, but it's not the finishing line. And as the process has evolved and people's expectations have changed and we've reinvigorated our webinar campaign, our thinking has changed. And I want to talk in this webinar about how that thinking has changed and how we are trying to make our webinars work significantly harder for us. I want to start with the observation that one webinar, a single webinar, a standalone random active webinar, is worth almost nothing. This isn't the bit where I tell you webinars don't work, but let me explain why I think just doing one, and if it works, we might do another one, is a bad approach. And we've seen this with clients. Oh, we tried webinars, we did a couple and nobody came, or we didn't get the sign-ups, or it was really hard to organize, really hard work, presenting's hard work. And so you do one, and then 6 weeks later, oh, well, we'll find a reason to postpone the next one. We haven't launched it. We have to cancel it. Nobody signed up. Let's cancel it. And it just sort of peters away for feeling like a big effort. And I make the analogy that setting up a webinar program is a bit like Concorde. Not that it's a gigantic white elephant or a magnificent engineering legacy, no. The first time you could fly a commercial airliner across the Atlantic supersonically cost billions and billions of pounds and francs, right? Because they had to design the whole thing, build the first thing, prototype it, test it, fly the first time. First flight, billions and billions of pounds. Second flight, you could book a ticket on Concorde for whatever it was then, a few £1,000s. And today there is no more Concorde. And so if you want to fly transatlantically, supersonically in a commercial airliner, you need to find billions and billions of pounds again. The first webinar is like building the first Concorde, building the first prototype of Concorde, really. It's not the same as getting them into regular commercial service. But webinars are incredibly powerful, right? This On24 finding found that significantly more demo bookings happened during webinars, literally live while the webinar was happening, than were happening in any other sort of sales or marketing activity. So webinars can potentially have a direct commercial lead funnel benefit. And that's not 2020 thinking. That's not like sign 30 people up to the webinar and hope they come and then see what happens. No, it's like, we're going to show you. And we have a bottom of funnel conversion moment in the website that's coming up later. Spoiler alert, I'm going to try and invite you to a one-to-one, no BS marketing strategy session with me. Not quite the same as a flight on Concorde, but and so that's an example of how things have evolved. I'm now going to tell you some insider secrets about how Articulate works for webinars and how our results. And it's not as flattering as you might think, except, the number of people who sign up isn't necessarily the primary metric anymore. So how many people do you think attend our webinars? And perhaps you might answer the same question. How many people attended the last webinar your organization ran? Whatever number you're thinking of, probably too high. Okay. Here's our numbers. We typically this year, the last 12 months, did a different model before, but typically we invite 3,000 to 5,000 people to our webinars, and they're trying to target them a little bit out of a population in a database of about 40,000. Typically 30 to 50 register, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, occasionally quite a lot more, depends on the subject and the nature of the promotion, but generally these are the ranges. And of that, something like a third attend one or other of the live transmissions. So this is the second of the two of the day. Here's the thing. For us, that engagement totals nearly a couple of thousand engaged contacts, leads, who are well qualified. It has generated nearly £1.5 million worth of pipeline. We're a small business. That's a meaningful amount of pipeline. It's one of the few things that we have found for ourselves where you put money in, effort in, and you get business out, right? That end-to-end pipeline, it's predictable and scalable. It's also in need of constant attention and optimization. And we have done 100 webinars or more to confirm and validate this pattern. I would say of those 100, and it's about 110 now, 30 in the last year. So I want to put this screen up. This is a screenshot from Google. We put the title of this webinar into Google, and like about 48% of Google searches these days, we got a Google AI overview, which did a reasonable job of suggesting things that you should do to get more bang for your buck out of webinars. Omni-channel push, reminders, reduce technical barriers, talk about challenges. There's a whole list, right? And I have to tell you something. It was a pretty close match to the first draft of the webinar that we had prepared today. Pretty close match. So if Google can answer in a second or two the question that your webinar title is doing, what's the webinar for? Thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it. You've braved, you've given your time to find out something you could have perhaps answered on Google, but no, we changed. This is version 2.0 of this webinar. And my commitment to you is I'm not going to repeat a single thing that's on this Google AI overview. You can go and look that up yourself, right? And here's the first recommendation if you want to 10x your webinar campaign. Do that exercise for every webinar title you come up with, and make sure that you've got something interesting or new or opinionated or well constructed or based on unique first party evidence or experience to say to people, right? It's really important. It doesn't have to be mind-dazzlingly original, new, genius stuff, but if you can answer it in 2 seconds on Google, it needs to be a bit better than that. Okay, come back and see at the end of this webinar if I met the challenge. Here's the next reframe I want to give you. Okay, your organization, certainly Articulate, is engaged in all kinds of regular routine marketing activities, blogging, white papers, advertising, press releases, case studies, it might be all of those things or other things. And while you might ask in the aggregate, is it what's working? What should we do more of? What should we do less of? What's cost effective? And those are important, good questions. We can help you answer them. you don't go, oh, we tried blogging after you did the first blog and 20 people turned up to read it. And I think webinars get treated completely different from almost every other form of routine activity. And every time we talk to clients about webinars, they have the same sort of constellation of objections and problems. We tried it before, it didn't work. It's really hard work to get them set up. It's quite hard to get people in the company to talk. It's quite hard to organize it. Scheduling, it's quite hard work. Nobody will come, nobody came. We didn't do any follow-up, nothing happened, we didn't move the needle. Those are the typical sorts of problems. And I think we should treat webinars differently. I think we should treat them a little bit like events. They're a version of face-to-face human contact. And in a world of AI slop, that's increasingly valuable, rare and important. It's live theatre versus Netflix. And I think that the argument to CFOs is not how many people did we sign up at the top of the funnel, important though that is in part. It was how many people did we engage, how many people did we reach, how much impact did that have on the sales process. And that means treating it a bit like an event. It means treating it a bit like an amplified and extended human personal engagement rather than a marketing top of funnel activity stream. Second thing is the thing that's producing value is not one webinar or each webinar, but the growing library of webinars. So I'll talk about what that means in a minute. So the first reason that a library of webinars is important is it's the gift that keeps on giving. So this is a chart of our webinar signups over time, and we got busy. Our marketing manager, Maddie, left for another job. We didn't replace her. I picked up a lot of her portfolio and I stopped doing it. And you can see the little gap where, but we still got leads, we still got registrations, and we thought, oh, that's interesting. So come this point last year where we went, well, what can we do? What will work? What should we try? We thought about a few things, tried a few things, and webinars by far were the most effective way of reaching and engaging people. There's other elements to our webinar campaign. I've talked about them in previous webinars. So we have data from an accidental experiment. Wistia has data that a third of webinar recordings are still being played 3 months after the live session. Our Vimeo data, video playback, also supports that. We have more people watching on Vimeo than we have attending live. And what I think that means in terms of being a recommendation is build the library, build consistency, regularity, rhythm and rigor are critical and important. And it would be better to commit to doing one webinar a month than one a week for 3 weeks and then packing it in. I think the second recommendation I have is amplify and use that library. It's a resource for the sales team, it's a resource for the company, it's a knowledge base. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that might be applied in an AI context. The next thing that we learned from going through that process was the realization when we analyzed who was coming to the webinars, particularly in detail. I mean, we did it 24-25 with Maddie's help, but to some extent, and then in very great detail the last 3 months of 2025, and they were extraordinarily well qualified. They were by far the most involved people in our sales process. They were using webinars in some cases to validate us or to check whether we knew stuff. We were sharing webinars when people asked us a question in a sales conversation. Quite often we'd just go make a webinar about it and go, we made a webinar about that. So it's becoming sort of intertwined with that. So for us, webinars are middle to bottom of funnel channel rather than top of funnel. It's not lead acquisition or awareness, it's conversion and closing. That's where webinars play. And I've talked about this in a little bit more detail. But the recommendation there is be also measuring the impact of the webinar stream, work campaign, on the bottom of the funnel an influence on deals, and you can do that to a certain extent with HubSpot deal attribution and things like that. There are other ways of measuring it. But that, I think, is the argument to take to the CFO, not the, we've got this many people signing up. The next argument to take probably to the CMO, because CMOs understand social media a bit better than CFOs. You might get 12 people in the room turning up for your webinar. You might have 30 people signing up for it. And you think that's a small number. I mean, if deal values are a certain level and so on, it could be potentially quite a big number of highly qualified, relevant people who've turned up to give their time to listen to you talk. And we'll come on to the theory of that in a minute. But if you can engage with those people during, before, after, through social media, and you can use, primarily LinkedIn in a B2B business context, LinkedIn to amplify and replicate the story out, those 12 people might be able to get your message, story, content in front of 5 figures worth of their network. And that amplification is extraordinarily powerful. This applies more to podcasting, where there's one person in the room, typically if you're interviewing somebody, but they might be able to reach their whole network and their network's network. So this social amplification piece is really important. We are not at heart a social media agency, so this is something that's slowly dawning on us, probably the same way that it dawns on people who don't think a lot about social media. We are learning, as we are gleefully embracing AI and experimenting left, right, and center with all kinds of things that we can do with it, that library of webinars, and for other clients, their webinars or their podcasts or whatever, is an extraordinary asset. It's a context memory system for AI, and you get it by having subject matter experts turn up once a week or once a month to do a webinar, do an interview with someone, present something, but cumulatively acquiring that content, a huge asset. So we have done things like take the transcripts of all the podcast interviews we've done for a client and all the case studies we've done and put them into a corpus, a knowledge base, and then put an AI layer over the top of it. And there's a little bit of engineering that has to happen when you've got 50, 100,000 words of content, so that we can ask questions of that corpus, like find 3 examples of companies that have done X, or find 2 quotes from clients who've found this thing helped. And just for writing about for that client, that's incredibly useful. We think that can go a lot further, and there's a lot of work going on at Articulate about how we build that articulate content brain. And if anyone's got a better name for it than that, I'm really all ears. We're good at the nerdy techie stuff and we're good at writing, but naming sometimes not so much. Here's another finding. People open the slide deck after the webinar more often, I think considerably more often, than they watch the video. And if they watch the video, they're probably watching it at 2x speed, which is why I'm talking really slowly right now. No, joking aside, I'd be right back. I've got to let my dog out. Always do it in the middle of a webinar. Do you remember it before 2020? If you did that in a video conference, you'd end up on the evening news. Anyway, now we all are into our colleagues' family or domestic or pet life. So recommendation number 1, make the slide deck at least scannable. Now you can see we're using big headlines. We're not trying to put a lot of text onto our slide deck, and Joanna, my colleague, explained about that in a webinar a couple of weeks ago. There's a lot of psychology and thought behind that. But this slide, if you've scanned it, you go, okay, yeah, I've taken something away from that. I might watch the video. Don't turn your slide decks into Word documents just because I'm telling you that people read the slide decks. The other thing that we do is we take the webinar transcript and we blogify it. In other words, we turn it into a long form blog post, so that in that blog post, you've got the video, you've got the slide deck, you've got an editorialized, not a transcript, but an editorialized article that summarizes the content. And that blogification then makes it accessible in a different format for AI and for readers who like to read blog posts. It's an obvious point, and yet it's really important to think about titles. You've got to offer something that is useful, relevant, and interesting for the audience, which means you've got to think about the personas and the ICPs and get that stuff right. And here are two tests that you're going to find hard, right? I've already given you the Google AI overview test. Test number 2 is, could you take that title, put it on your competitor's website, and expect to get the same thing or better, right? Does it align with your difference positioning messaging? And the third test, the second new test on this slide, and this is probably the hardest, is what is at least one true, surprising new thing that you can bring to that webinar, even if the title is somewhat interchangeable. And if you can find one true, unique, valuable thing that you can say no one else can say, that might be an indication you need a bit better title. Now, there's a wonderful journalist called Donald Murray who wrote a book that I strongly recommend if you can find it, called Writing to Deadline. He won a Pulitzer Prize. He would write up to 50 versions of the headline for each article he was writing, and he'd come at it from all kinds of different angles. And his thought process was that if he could explore that world of title ideas, by the time he picked the right one, and it might have been the first or the middle or the last idea for a title he came up with, but he will have thought about the story really thoroughly. And I think thinking hard about the title is thinking hard about the webinar. I often hear the objection that webinars are hard. You've got to integrate Zoom with HubSpot, you've got to build a landing page, you've got to write some emails, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And there are, when we did our manual workflow checklist for doing a webinar, we had 63 separate steps up to the time when I rock up here and click go live. You know, promotion email 1, promotion email 2, reminder email, thank you email, blah, 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 blah. The good news is, once you've done the first one, you can clone all that stuff for the second one. It gets easier. There's a learning curve. And if you do a lot of them, as we do, you can automate the hell out of all that stuff. And we now can compress 4 hours of sort of rather tedious HubSpottery into 30 minutes. And that's with some tools that we've built. But the work that goes into doing all of that, whether it's building the first version and cloning it, or automating the whole process, or writing the process and documenting it, there are people who know how to do that. Hello, Articulate. And you can, they're pretty well trodden paths. You can use AI to help with some of this stuff. It isn't a reason not to do it. And it's certainly not a reason to give up after the first one. Which brings me to the one line I would really like you to take away from today's webinar. The sale is the sample. And I can't claim credit for this. This comes from Blair Enns, E-N-N-S. And what he is encapsulating here for people who are in the business of selling expertise, like marketing agencies or whatever business you're in, the experience people should have on from your marketing, your content, your website, from top, middle, and bottom funnel type self-service engagements like attending a webinar or something like that, setting up a demo, should be of a piece, should be aligned with, should be the same as, or the same spiritually as, the experience they get when they actually are paying customers, right? So here am I talking about marketing stuff and webinars. If you work with Articulate and we help you with webinars, it's still going to be me and my colleagues, and we're coming from the same place, and you're still going to be talking to me, which may or may not be a good thing. But the experience of the marketing and the sale process is the same as the experience, or aligned with or dovetailing the experience you get as a customer. Which means it's more about thinking of webinars as part of that sales process and part of, or prefiguring, representing, talking about the process of working with a company. And scaling and amplifying that human contact. And we talk to a lot of people pre and post sales. And one of the things we hear quite often, probably on 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 clients, will say something like, what we need is to get in the room with people more often. When we're actually talking to somebody about what we do, people get very excited and they understand it and they want to buy it from us. If we can get in the room, we'll close the deal, or we'll close more of the deals. We have a great close rate once we're talking to people, this sort of thing. Oh, now my dog is back again. I'm so sorry. Come on, puppy. I've got both of them here, look. There they are. My wonderful audience. They don't interrupt me too often. Okay. Thank you. So if 12 people turn up to a webinar and they're a good fit and interested and engaged listening, you can turn around to your CFO or your head of sales and say, I had 12 high engagement personal conversations in 1.5 hour slot. It was a high leverage meeting, rather than we ran a webinar and only 12 people came, so we should give up on doing webinars. If you want to make the most of the investment of time and effort into a webinar campaign, the webinar has to talk about what the next step is, right? You have to be really clear about what the next best step is. We had a client for whom we generated about 800 leads off the back of not webinars, but another piece of content. They all dropped into HubSpot and nothing happened to them. Nobody emailed them, nobody followed up, nobody called them, zilch. And we thought we were doing an amazing job at that time. This was almost 10 years ago, because we thought our job stopped when we handed over a lead into the CRM, right? That's marketing job done, over to you guys in sales. And we got fired because, quotes, they weren't seeing the results. And we said, what do you mean? We gave you 800 leads. Oh yeah, but we didn't do anything with them. So webinars are always part of a journey. Some routes are really clear. Come to the next webinar. Here's what it is. Book a marketing strategy session with Matthew. You might learn something. Send us an email if you have any questions. Come back to the website and have a look at some other stuff. Maybe fill in a form if you've got a project in mind, right? Some of them are a little bit more implied and some of them a little bit more proactive on our side. We might reach out and connect on LinkedIn. We might send you an email going, we saw you came to the webinar. We thought you might like this because we saw this on your LinkedIn profile, that sort of behavior. So the stuff that happens before the webinar, where you get people, how you engage people, how you get them into the funnel. Talked a little bit about that in previous things. The webinar itself needs to signpost the next steps, and what happens afterwards needs to signpost the next steps. It's got to be focused on the sort of needs and goals of the people who are listening. It's not just a kind of knock on the door, foot in the door sales thing, but there has to be part of a journey. So, recommendation to get more out of your webinars, think about what happens next and signpost it. I want to talk for a moment about what happens after you've got over that initial learning curve and you're now doing, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, 97, 98, 99. We reckon 10 to 20 webinars, you will have the process down pat. You'll know exactly how to do it. It will become part of the life of the business. The effort required will be largely thinking about what you want to say and preparing what you want to say, and very little or less about the mechanics of running the webinar. And in order to do that, you need a little bit of a team. You need somebody who's responsible for the webinar program and who's championing it. It usually isn't going to be the experts who are going to be talking, because they have other things to do and they're probably harder to get hold of. They might be, but it's unlikely. You need people who are involved and accountable for their contribution. And you need people you need to communicate with and inform. So you probably have stakeholders like CFOs, CMOs and so on that you need to report for. But regularly reviewing what happened, what worked, what didn't, what you learned, what titles worked, what processes can be improved, that continuous process of improvement probably kicks in around episode 8, 10, 12, and should continue constantly. Getting a team is a mandatory thing, and having somebody own it is, in my view, essential. Right. Talked a little bit about the tests that a title has to clear, but this slide talks about where that contribution comes from. And it's easy to talk about what you're expert in. I mean, I could probably bore for England about Lego and 1990s computer games and aviation, probably a few other things, webinars perhaps. Not all of those things make suitable webinar topics. Obviously, you have to take into account what your audience might be interested in and what's commercially relevant to the organization. And in the middle of those three things, that's the sweet spot. And this takes more work than you think. I think for this quarter's webinars, we came up with 20 or 30 ideas. Before you run the next one, book the next 3. Tie yourself to the mast like Ulysses so you don't get seduced by the sirens and go to your death. Sorry, that's an exaggerated historical reference, but commit up front, put them in the calendar so that you turn up. And I think the most valuable reason for doing webinars live is not to make you come and see them when I'm running them, it's to make me turn up and do them, right? It's a commitment device. So, a couple of minutes over time. Thank you for your patience. I have covered the whole contents of this deck, which I didn't this morning, so I'm pretty happy about that. I hope in that last half an hour there were some nuggets that you didn't get or couldn't get from Google, from some hard-won experience. My closing thought is go and book your next 3 webinars right after you've booked a marketing strategy session with me. Literally, I'll do some research about your organization, about you. We'll book up a call. I'll turn up with some questions. You turn up with some questions. We'll have a nice conversation. Our next webinar is next Wednesday. My colleague Joanna and Kyle are going to be talking about 10 questions to ask your website developer about AI. So AI discoverability is on the agenda. Going to be an interesting conversation, interesting webinar. I shall look forward to it greatly. But that is the end of today's session. Okay, only 3 minutes over. All right, not too bad. Thank you very much for coming. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, wherever you are.